And we're rolling. Hello, everyone. Let's talk about how to select absolutely anything with CSS selectors. Um, so first, let's review what the different selector tools and what have you that we have at our disposal are. So let's do this round robin style, starting with Matt P. Matt, name any selector.
In CSS or just
Yep.
any selector? All right, I'm like totally drawing a blank right now.
Some way that we can select anything in CSS.
like to do it by its class?
Sure.
Okay.
There's one. Chris, give me another one.
You can select by ID using
Yes,
the pound and or hashtag.
Yeah, so we do class with dot, ID with an octothorpe. Amp, give me another one.
The element itself.
Yep. So we call those tag selectors. There's one that I didn't put in the curriculum because there's not a whole lot of good reasons to do it. There's some, just not a lot. That's the universal selector. It selects every individual element. So actually, put that here. Call that the universal selector. And these are our base selectors. Now, if that was all we had, we certainly wouldn't be able to select anything. So we have some more ways we can do this, including combinators. So let's see if we can figure out some combinators. Bryce, can you give me one CSS combinator?
Would that be like the comma? Like if you were to do like, okay.
Totally. So comma's one of them. I don't know what the name of that one is. We'll look it up. All right, the best I'm getting on this is multiple selector combinator. So we'll call that multiple selector, which is the comma. Brad, give me another combinator.
Oh, the tilde.
Yeah, what does that tilde do?
Is it the descendant?
Oop, not descendant. Close.
The sibling?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's the sibling combinator. Matt C, give me another combinator.
Plus sign?
Love it. Do you remember what it's called?
Adjacent sibling?
You got it. All right, Sarah, give me another one.
The descendant combinator, which is just a space.
Yep. Very nice. Tiffany, give me another combinator.
I was thinking of the greater than symbol
Yeah. What's that one do?
for parent, parent to child, or child to parent. Sorry, child to parent.
So we'll call that the direct descendant. or something that's called child. Child combinator. I'm trying to think if there are other ones. Any other combinators we can think of?
Well, I know like when we did the CSS diner, there was like type of and
Sure. So those are those
And
aren't
child.
combinators. Those are
Okay.
pseudo classes. We'll talk about those next.
Okay.
Any other combinators? So this is like kind of like operators in JavaScript. Special characters. Sure. So full list of combinators: descendant, child, adjacent sibling, general sibling, and multiple. All right, excellent. So we've got selectors, combinators, next we've got pseudo classes. There's a ton of pseudo classes. Let's just get a couple really common ones. Efren, can you give me a pseudo class?
The hover links.
Love it. Hover. Going back around to Matt P. Can you give me another pseudo class?
Visited.
Love it. Chris, give me another one.
Would nth of type be a pseudo class?
Yes, it is. Very nice. Amp, give me another pseudo class.
First child.
Love it. Bryce, give me another one. We've got nth of type. Is there another nth one?
There is another nth one. Trying to remember.
Starts with a C.
God, it's not nth child, is it?
It 100% is. All right, open to anybody. Just shout it out. Any other common pseudo classes?
Link.
What
Checked.
else?
Last child.
Love it. Any others?
Would checked be one?
Yeah.
Okay.
For an input checkbox? Any other pseudo classes?
Active.
Love it. So pseudo classes are all states. Something is in a state of being hovered. Something has been visited. Something is currently checked. Something is currently being navigated to. Something is in the state of being a hyperlink, I guess. And these nth of types is like, this is currently in the state of being, having this relationship with other children. That's states. Then lastly, we've got a couple pseudo elements. So these are things that are not actual HTML elements, but are kind of like them, and we can style them however we want. So some examples there. Before. So immediately before an element, you can put something. Same thing with after. Any other pseudo elements we can think of?
First letter.
Love it.
Marker?
I don't think marker might be a pseudo element. I feel like that's I use it so rarely. Let me look up. That might be a pseudo element. So this was first letter. By the way, first letter gets used mostly with drop caps. A drop cap is when you have some text and then you make like the first letter super big. That's called a drop cap. It's usually what first letter's for. Let's see, is marker one?
Yeah, it looks like MDN has marker listed.
Totally. Beautiful. So marker is like the bullet for a list item, or the number for the for an ordered list. Any other pseudo elements?
Placeholder. I think we've seen you use that one before.
Yeah. Placeholders are on inputs. They kind of give you hints about what content should go there. So if you want to style that, set a font, set a color, that kind of stuff, that's how you do that. Other pseudo elements.
First line.
First line, just like first letter. Also often used with drop cap kind of stuff. So like you're looking like a magazine or something, and the whole first line is written in small caps. Here, it looks like this. So that's a drop cap right there. Let's see. This thing right here, where like Marley was dead, is all in what we call small caps. So that's a drop cap and then small caps. And so if you do that over the whole first line, that's pretty common. So that selector was meant to give you an easier way to do that.
Do they use first line also? You know how if you're on the web and there's synopsis at the beginning of the web page, do they use it for that too to feed over?
Like in the
You know how
search
sometimes
results?
yeah, like if you let's say you do search results and you start to see the beginning of an article and it has like if you did a search and it starts to have some information. So if it's an article, a lot of times you can start to read on the page like the first line of the article.
Ah,
You're
yeah,
like,
yeah.
oh yeah, did they feed it through using that, or is there some other function that does that?
They could. It's probably JavaScript, honestly, but
Okay.
But yeah. All right, and there's a bunch of other ones. Basically, this is our toolbox. So if we want to select something on a page, these are the 4 kinds of things that we can use, and the symbols we use for them. Questions about this so far? Cool. So let's do some exploring. So if I go over to MDN, and let's say I want to select this thing that says marker up here. All right, it's an H1. Are there, so maybe I want to see how many, is that the only H1 on there? And it should be, because they're only allowed one H1 on a page. So let's see. What comes back from that? Cool, only one thing in the node list. Good. So if I wanted to select that, H1 would be a pretty good candidate. Now, let's say there was more than one. I want you to think to yourself for a second. I'm going to call on someone. Think about how else I might have been able to select that H1 if there was more than one on the page. Think to yourself for a sec. I'm going to call on someone. How else could I have selected that? Brad, give me an idea.
So I was thinking like if there were classes involved, but I honestly don't know.
So yeah, H1 doesn't have a class. We can't add a class to it. We need to target it to be able to add a class to it. Someone help Brad out.
Could you do article greater than sign H1?
Totally. So I could do that. I would probably go a little more specific than that, though. Since this article has this class of main page content, I would probably go main page content, direct descendant H1. So like this. What was it called? Main page content. And then direct descendant H1. Yep. So that one also selects the same thing. So as a general strategy, that's kind of how you want to approach this. You need to figure out which element you want to select, and then you look through your toolbox and see how can I get that. If there's a way that you can just use a direct selector, that's probably the easiest, especially if it's an ID. IDs are supposed to be unique on the page. So if you see an ID, it's not always the case, but you should be able to reliably select just that element from its ID. Otherwise, you could go off of the class, but you have to be careful with that one because classes can show up more than once. So something like this, I'd feel pretty damn confident about because there's probably not more than one thing on the page with a class of main page content. That's sort of, I feel pretty safe about using that as a selector. Now, like the page might have more than one article tag. And like if it doesn't now, it could in the future. So like I'd be a little anxious about selecting something with just like article child selector H1. I would feel better about targeting this ID of content, but check this out. If I do H1 yet again, what was it called? ID of content. Cool, that's easy enough. This won't work though. Why is that not going to work?
Because it's not the direct child.
Not the direct child. It has one in between. So I could do just a descendant selector like that. That'll work.
So this is starting to make sense, but I guess my biggest hang up now, and the one I've run into, is when do you use the plus?
Sure. So plus is really good when you have a list and you want to get everything but the first one. That's probably the best use case for that. So for example, okay, so I've got all these LIs here. So all right, how could I target these? So all these ones that start with toggle, how about I just grab all those real quick? Oops. That should have been query selector all. Okay, so if I do that, this is every toggle on that page. If, for whatever reason, I wanted everything but the first one, I could have said every toggle but first and done dot toggle plus dot toggle. So only a toggle that is immediately followed by another toggle, or that immediately follows another toggle. So now, if I do that, I got 29 back instead of 34. And check out what that first one is. That was the first one for all of them. This is the first one for everything but the first one.
So that doesn't have anything to do with like parent-child, the plus
Nope.
sign. It's just immediately follows usually. Like I guess you could say they're siblings because
Yep.
then I guess how does the tilde come into play if that's the sibling selector?
Good question. So tilde is, so with the plus, it needs to immediately follow whatever the thing is. With the tilde, it just needs to follow it somewhere. So like, if I do box plus box, then this is saying give me a box that immediately follows another box. Does this one immediately follow another box? No, it doesn't. Does this one immediately follow another box? Yes, it does. So does this one. So does this one. So does this one. So that's plus. If I did box, box, triangle, box, circle, box, and I do that same selector, a box that immediately follows another box, think to yourself, which ones would get the check mark? Think to yourself, box plus box, which ones would be highlighted on here? I'm going to call on amp. What you got?
So the selector is it's the first box, and then after that it's everything after that first box, right?
So it's
Is
a
that my
box
understanding?
that immediately follows a box.
So it'd be the second box.
That's the
So to
only one
speak.
it would select.
Yeah.
Because there's no other element on here that immediately follows a box.
Right.
Now,
They're all different.
exactly. If I did box tilde box and did that same thing, Can I get a volunteer to tell me what would be selected with box tilde box?
Would that be all, or excuse me, not all the squares, but just the second square, the third square, and the fourth square?
You got it.
Not the first?
Exactly. So
Okay.
this one isn't does not follow a box. This one does. This one does, because it doesn't need to be right next to it. It just needs to have occurred before it. This one is the same thing.
This
Could you
helps
do
my
like a-
caveman brain like
Nice.
a lot.
Yes, we like pretty shapes.
So the and like they don't have to be the same thing. They often are, but it could be circle tilde box. And if we do that, remember we read selectors right to left. So a box that follows a circle. That's just that one.
Yeah,
And
that was
just
going to be
for-
my question. If you could do, if they didn't have to be the same, like the circle box.
Don't have to be the same at all.
And for Uber clarification, this is assuming they're all within the same like div, for example.
Bingo. They all have to be siblings.
Okay.
So that means they all have the same parent.
Is that why when we were doing the toggle example on the console log, we only got 29 back as opposed to like 33, as some of those were in alternate divs?
No, because it didn't select the first one. So this CSS first steps link here, that's the first one in the full list. It's skipped in the second list because we did toggle plus toggle. Well, this one has a toggle class, but it doesn't immediately follow something that has a toggle class. And
Okay, that part makes sense, but forgive my ignorance, but so why wouldn't there be 33 if we did the toggle plus toggle here? Why wouldn't there just be 33 as opposed to 29?
Because there's more groups of them. So there's like, here, I'll make this a little smaller.
Is it because it's a nested list itself?
It's not nested. It just has it's broken up a little bit here. So like, this goes that one, this one, but then there's that reference heading. And so we don't get modules because modules doesn't immediately follow something that's a toggle because this isn't a toggle.
Okay, I see. That makes a lot more sense. Thank you.
Yep. See if there's other stuff that might be tricky to select on here. So if I want to select this entire, this OL here, my thought process goes, all right, I probably don't want to select the OL because that's pretty general. Like, this article content could reasonably have an OL somewhere in it. Probably does. So if I target that, I'm targeting everything that uses an OL. All right. So what about its parent element? Well, div is even worse. And doing like a div that has a direct child of OL, that's not very good either. So this H4 isn't part of the hierarchy of this OL. It's a sibling of the div, but in its like tree, it's not one of its ancestors. Its next ancestor would be sidebar inner. Okay, I have some confidence that there's only one sidebar inner on there. And so then it becomes a question of, all right, what is the most confident way I could get just that one OL? And so so sidebar inner, const sidebar inner. So I could do sidebar inner OL as a descendant selector. But let's say these things were nested, and like each one of these toggles also has an OL in it. Well, all of those would get selected. In fact, I'll bet that's what happens. So if I look at sidebar inner, yeah, check it out. That hit 35 different things. And it's probably all those nested lists. So that one, yeah. So that's also an OL. Uh-oh. So the way that I could target just that that one OL is to use a chain of descendant selectors. You can use those combinators more than once. So, but only the top level. So that would be like sidebar inner child selector div, child selector OL. And so that's going, all right, the sidebar inner thing, any direct descendant that's a div. So it only has the one, so that alone narrows it down like pretty much all the way. And then I want an OL that's a direct descendant of that div. So sidebar inner, direct descendant div, direct descendant OL. So now if I do sidebar inner but only the top level, now I only have the one.
And that's because the OLs within the OLs are not direct descendants of the div, but instead direct descendants of the OL.
Bingo.
Gotcha.
Strictly speaking, I think they're direct descendants of the LIs inside of that OL, but yes, right idea.
So like if you wanted to continue that chaining down and get like the 14th LI out of that list, how would you do that?
So, okay, so in that OL, get the 14th LI. So I would probably do something like sidebar inner, but only the top level. Since I did query selector all, I gotta get just the first one. Oh, actually, nope. Top level. 14th LI. So if this selects the OL, to get the 14th LI in there, then I want a direct descendant LI. Otherwise, I might end up targeting the LIs in those nested lists. I want an LI that's an nth child 14. And there it is.
So how do you discern between nth child and nth of type?
Nth of type is probably not the one that you want most of the time. Nth child, that's your like 80% use case. Nth of type would be if you have a bunch of mixed children. So like you have a div followed by a section, followed by a div, followed by a section. So there's some kind of pattern like that. But you want to specifically target one type of element that's in that pattern without worrying about any other thing around it. It's a lot less common.
If you wanted the second OL, it would be the same thing, just moving up a level and just saying it would be OL nth child 2.
Yep, absolutely.
Okay.
So yeah, you could do something like not the direct descendant. I want an OL, but I want the whatever the second one that it finds is. That would work.
Oh, cool.
Did I read it clear? Oh, didn't find one, but yeah, you can do stuff like that. Other questions about locating something?
For the sake of argument, could you do like div child OL? I mean, just keep going on.
Absolutely.
Okay, it's just ugly coding.
Correct. And like selectors that look like this are brittle. And so what we mean by brittle is that over the lifetime of a page, you end up moving stuff around. You go, you know what? I don't really want that sidebar to be there anymore. I want the sidebar to be on the other side. Or like, I'm just going to add this one other element in here. I'm going to put a spacer between these headings and the things. And so if you have a lot of these kinds of selectors, those things end up breaking everything a lot easier. So we call that brittle selectors.
I was going to say, at that point, you just want to give it like an ID or a class, right?
Absolutely.
Okay.
But if you're working with like somebody else's page that you don't have control over, you can do that kind of thing. Also, pro tip, check this out. So I want some particular nested thing. All right, I want to get this element right here. One of the things that you can copy is the CSS selector, and it'll do its best at figuring out the most like efficient way to get there. So like that's the CSS selector for that particular one.
So when you selected it, it just put it on your clipboard and you just pasted it, right?
Bingo.
Okay.
And it gives you the whole path to get to it? Okay.
Exactly. And like these are usually not very pretty, but that is a way to get them pretty easily. Oh, there's one more that we didn't talk about. This is part of the corgis. One more. Who can tell me what that is?
For an array.
Attribute?
An attribute.
Attribute selector. So we can also select an HTML element by an attribute that it has. So something like, let's see. God, this HTML is so clean. I'm so used to just looking at trash from like the New York Times and there's. All right, here we go.
I thought you were going to say us.
No.
Yeah, me too.
Like we just like went down like 5 notches like in 2 seconds there.
So the New York Times, I think, has the shittiest HTML in the entire business. So let's take a look at it.
I don't know. The Tennessean's pretty bad.
It's like the least semantic shit. Div, 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 section, div.
Is that just because it's so dynamic? They're making changes so quickly.
No, it's because they're lazy and like don't care about making their site accessible. Like this is unforgivable. It's so bad. Div, span, div. Like, oh god, just bad, really bad code. The semantics, it's beautiful. All right, let's say I wanted to select something that, oh, perfect. So like this details thing has this open attribute. Oh, it doesn't have a value though. That doesn't count. Oh no, I'll bet it will. All right, so this is, so that's open right now. Let me see if I can select that. There we go. So you could do something like that. Where you see attribute selectors a lot is something like this, where you want to target it by maybe it's href. So you go like, I want to target the link where the href is this. So that would be like link is document.querySelector. You gotta be careful about your quotes and what have you on this. And there it is. So you could do that to target a link with a particular URL, or like an image that has a particular URL. So it's like, oh, I want the thing that has dog.jpg as its source. That's what you use attribute selectors for a lot.
So source is an attribute of the image element.
Correct.
Okay.
As is alt. All those are attributes. So this has an attribute of this class string. This href is an attribute. The target is an attribute. Rel is an attribute. More questions? Let's review. So basic selectors, we've got 5 of them. These can be used as part of combinators, parts of all kinds of different things. But fundamentally, these are like our 5 basic selectors. We can describe something in terms of its relationship to other stuff with combinators. One thing that you will notice is not a combinator and cannot be a combinator and will never be a combinator is a parent selector. You can select something that's the child of a parent, but you can't select something that has a particular child. And like that seems like, oh, wouldn't that be kind of obvious? When you look at how CSS engines work, that would like bring the web to a crawl if it had to look both directions. So it's never going to happen. But you cannot select something based on who its children are. But you can select based on who their parents are. So if you want to describe their relationship to another element, you use a combinator. If the element is in a particular state or in a particular order, that's a pseudo class. If it's a part of an element, but it's not a distinct element itself, it's a pseudo element. And we can use all of these in any combination we want to try to target an element. Questions before we break?
Yeah, one last question. Is it cleaner code to use CSS to capitalize the first letter of a string, or is it still clean code to capitalize it using a function in JavaScript?
Oh man, that is an awesome question. So it depends on why you're capitalizing it. If you're capitalizing it because the content it's like a proper noun, that should be JavaScript. Because you're dynamically fixing the content. It came back lowercase, it really should be uppercase. If it's purely a visual effect that you're doing, that should be CSS. So things like that drop cap or the small caps on the first line, that's pure CSS. I would not transform those to uppercase with JavaScript. And so like a tool that you could use for figuring out which one's which is think about if you could theme this. So like if there was a drop down over here that let me pick different themes and I could do old-timey or future or steampunk or whatever and just make all this look completely different. If Pokemon would always be capitalized, if the Pokemon's name would always be capitalized regardless of how that looked, that's changing the content. That should be JavaScript. If you can imagine a theme where like it looked totally different or used a drop cap or used small caps or something like that, that's CSS. Great question. Any others? Cool. That is how you select anything in CSS. I hope it was helpful.